walk from my car to my daughter's front door should have taken 30 seconds. It took me the rest of my life to complete it. I remember the way the afternoon light sat low over her neighborhood that day. It was one of those late September evenings in Ontario where the air smells like dried leaves and something sweet you can't quite name. I was in a good mood, a genuinely good mood, the kind you don't rush, the kind you want to hold in your hands for a moment before you share it with someone else. I had news, big news, the kind that changes things, and I was walking it right to my daughter's door. But when I got close enough, I heard voices through the screen, and whatever was waiting for me inside that house, it wasn't what I thought. Before I go any further, if this is your first time on this channel, I hope you'll stay with me today because this story is one I've held on to for a long time. It took a lot to sit down and tell it. If it moves you at all, like the video, leave a comment. I'd love to know where you're watching from and what you would have done if you were standing in my shoes that evening, because I still think about the choices I made. I still wonder if I was right. Now let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand who these people are before you understand what I heard. My daughter's name is Renata. She's 41 years old, and for most of her life, she was the center of mine. After her mother and I divorced, she was about 7 at the time, I made a decision that I've never regretted. I showed up every weekend, every birthday, every school play, every heartbreak. I drove 4 hours each way, more times than I can count, to be wherever she needed me to be. We were close, the kind of close that people notice when they're around you. She used to call me every Sunday morning, rain or shine, for almost 20 years. We'd talk about everything and nothing, the news, her garden, memories from when she was small. Those calls were something I looked forward to the way some people look forward to coffee in the morning. It was just ours. Her husband, Martin, he came into the picture about 8 years ago. I tried to like him. I genuinely tried. He's the kind of man who presents well. Good handshake, good posture, always says the right things at the right moments. He told me once, very early on, that Renata was the most important thing in the world to him, and he looked me right in the eye when he said it. I believed him, or maybe I wanted to believe him. There's a difference, and I've learned to notice it. There were little things over the years, the way he talked over her sometimes, the way certain decisions, where they vacationed, what they did with their savings, who they spent holidays with, always seemed to land in his favor. Renata would explain it away, and I let her, because she was happy, or she seemed happy, and I didn't want to be that father, the one who can't let his daughter grow up. So I kept my observations to myself, and I kept showing up. Now my brother Gerald was 4 years older than me and about 4 times wiser. He never married, never had children. He spent his life collecting experiences instead of things. He lived in Southeast Asia for a decade, taught English in a small town in Portugal for 3 years, came back to Canada in his 50s, and bought a small cottage on a lake near Muskoka. Nothing fancy, just a little place with a wooden dock and a screened porch, and the kind of quiet that puts your nervous system back together. I used to visit him there every summer, sometimes with Renata when she was young. Those are some of the best memories I have. The 3 of us fishing in the early morning, Gerald teaching her to paddle a canoe, the smell of the wood stove when the evenings turned cool. He called that place his sanctuary. I think it was the truest thing he owned. Gerald died in July. Quickly, the way some people are spared, if that's the right word for it, a heart attack in his sleep, in his own bed. He was 73 years old. I miss him every day. What I didn't know, not until I sat with his lawyer a few weeks after the funeral, was what he had been quietly building for most of his life. Gerald was methodical, careful. He invested slowly and consistently for 40 years, lived modestly, and accumulated far more than any of us realized. When the lawyer read me the will, I had to ask him to repeat himself. The cottage was mine, and so was $6.8 million. I sat in that office for a long time after everyone else had left. Just sat there. Not because I was thinking about what to do with it, but because I kept thinking about Gerald, about how he never once hinted at any of this, about how he just showed up to life the way he always did, with his quiet dignity and his unhurried way of looking at things. He left it to me because, as the letter said, a personal letter he had written himself, tucked inside the legal documents. He trusted me to do right by it. He said I was the only person in his life who had ever loved him without wanting anything from him in return. I folded that letter and put it in my breast pocket, and I kept it there for days. The plan, when I drove to Renata's house that September evening, was simple. I wanted to tell her in person. I wanted to see her face. We hadn't spoken as much lately. Martin had a habit of answering her phone sometimes, which I never mentioned, but noticed. And I thought, this is the kind of moment you deliver face to face. I parked at the curb. Their house is a nice one. Victorian style, well kept, in a neighborhood where the trees are old and the houses are proud. I walked up the long driveway and around to the side entrance. The way I always do. Renata showed me that way years ago, said it was more comfortable than ringing the front bell. The side door has a screen, an old wooden screen door that never quite closes all the way. And from the garden path, you can hear everything through it as clearly as if you were standing inside. I was about 10 feet away when I heard Martin's voice. He was speaking quietly, not secretive exactly, just the low, purposeful tone of a man who thinks he's alone. I stopped walking, and I listened. He's not going to live forever, Martin said, and when it comes, we need to be positioned correctly. There was a pause, then Renata's voice, softer, hesitant. I just think it's too early to be talking about this. It's never too early. He's 70 years old. His brother just died. These things have a way of focusing people, of making them think about what they want to leave behind. A pause, and who they want to leave it to. Another silence. I don't want to push him, Renata said. Nobody's pushing anything. Martin's voice was smooth, patient, the voice of someone who has rehearsed this. All I'm saying is, the relationship needs to be maintained. We need to be the people he's closest to. We need to be there for him, consistently, so that when it comes time for him to make decisions, we're the ones he thinks of. I stood absolutely still on that garden path. The light was going gold around me. A neighbor's dog barked somewhere 2 houses down. And what about the cottage? Martin said. Did she mention anything to you about what Gerald might have left? Renata was quiet for a moment. No, I don't think she knows. Your father might know. He and Gerald were close. He's not the kind of person to talk about money. Exactly, Martin said, which is why we have to pay attention to the things he doesn't say. If he inherited something significant, we need to be positioned. That word again, positioned. That feels wrong, Renata said. It's not wrong, it's practical. He's your father. What's his is going to become yours eventually. All I'm saying is, don't let sentiment cloud good sense. Another pause. Longer this time. Okay, Renata said quietly. Just that. Okay. I stood on that path for what felt like a very long time. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in those moments, because I think it matters. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel the urge to walk through that door and say something I couldn't take back. What I felt was much quieter than that, much sadder. It was the feeling you get when something you believed in turns out to be smaller than you thought. When you look at a piece of your life and realize the shape of it has changed and you didn't notice until now. I thought about my daughter's voice when she said, okay, the hesitation before it, the slight softness of someone who isn't fully comfortable with what they're agreeing to, but isn't stopping it either. And I wondered how many other conversations like this one had happened before tonight. How many small negotiations over my life and what it was worth. I took one step back, then another. I turned around and walked back down the driveway, quietly. Got into my car, sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel, and then I drove away. I never rang the bell. On the drive home, I didn't call anyone. I didn't turn on the radio. I just drove, and I thought. By the time I pulled into my own driveway, I had made a decision. Not an angry decision, not a reactive one. Just a clear, calm, fully conscious choice about how I wanted to proceed. I was not going to tell Renata about the inheritance. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. What I was going to do instead was watch and think and take care of things properly on my own timeline in the way that Gerald would have respected. I called my lawyer 2 days later, a woman I've worked with for years, someone I trust completely. I told her I had come into a significant inheritance and that I wanted to restructure my estate planning. We met for 3 hours. I told her what I had heard, not emotionally, just clearly, the way you explain a set of facts. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said nothing for a moment, and then she said, "What do you want to protect?" That was the right question. "The cottage," and I said first. "Gerald's cottage. I want it in a trust, protected, named for his memory. I want it used, not sold. I want people to sit on that dock and hear the water." She nodded and wrote, "The rest of the money, I want it organized so that my choices are mine, not anticipated, not managed by anyone else." Over the following weeks, we restructured everything. The cottage was placed in a family trust with specific terms. It could be used, not sold, and any future use would be governed by guidelines Gerald himself would have appreciated. The financial assets were reorganized through a private structure that gave me complete control and complete discretion. I also updated my will. I didn't remove Renata from it. She is still my daughter. That doesn't change. But the terms shifted. There were conditions now, requirements around how funds could be used. A trustee, my lawyer, who would manage distributions thoughtfully and without outside pressure. I also created a series of charitable bequests, things that mattered to Gerald: environmental work on the lake, a small arts program in the town near the cottage, a fund for elderly people in my community who needed in-home support and couldn't afford it. These felt right. They felt like Gerald. During that same period, I continued to see Renata. I didn't pull away dramatically. I didn't become cold. I just observed with new eyes. Martin called me twice during those months. Both times were pleasant, warm calls. He asked how I was doing after Gerald's death. He expressed sympathy. He mentioned once, casually, that Renata and he had been thinking they might want a cottage of their own someday. And had I ever thought about what Gerald's place might go for, or whether I planned to keep it? I told him I hadn't decided anything yet. I kept my voice neutral. Easy, the voice of a man with nothing particular on his mind. Renata came for dinner once, without Martin. He had a work thing, she said. We had a good evening. She laughed at my cooking the same way she always has. When she hugged me at the door on her way out, it lasted a moment longer than usual, and I let it. I love my daughter. Whatever she agreed to in that kitchen, whatever she was willing to go along with, she is still the person I taught to tie her shoes, the person who used to fall asleep in the car on the way home from my mother's house, and I would carry her inside without waking her. She is still that, but love and trust are not the same thing. And that distinction had become very important to me. About 4 months after the evening on the garden path, I invited Renata and Martin to dinner at a restaurant. A nice one, the kind of occasion that signals something without announcing it. They arrived looking slightly cautious and slightly eager at the same time, which I noticed. We ordered. We talked. Martin was charming. Renata was warm but watching me closely, the way she does when she senses something is coming. After the main course, I set down my fork and I told them I had something I wanted to share. They both went still. As you probably know, I said, Gerald left me a few things. Martin leaned forward almost imperceptibly. Renata's hands came together on the table. He left me the cottage, and he left me a sum of money. I kept my voice even. It's significant. Silence. I've spent the last few months putting things in order, making decisions about what I want to do with it, and I wanted to sit down with you both and be transparent about where things stand. Martin said, "Of course," and his voice was perfectly calibrated, interested but restrained. "The cottage is in a trust," I said. "It's not going to be sold. It will be maintained in Gerald's name. The terms of use are set." Martin nodded slowly. "And the rest of the estate has been restructured. My will has been updated. I've also made a number of charitable commitments that are now legally in place." A pause. I took a sip of water. I wanted you both to hear it from me directly, rather than through speculation. I looked at them both. Because I think clarity is better than ambiguity, and I've always preferred honest conversation. Martin said, That sounds very thoughtful, but his eyes had changed slightly. Something behind them that was doing quick calculations. Renata was looking at the table. "There's one more thing," I said. They both looked at me. "A few months ago, I came to your house. I parked at the curb. I walked up the driveway, around to the side door the way I always do. I kept my voice completely level, and I heard a conversation through the screen." Renata's face went white. I didn't repeat what I had heard. I didn't quote it back at them line by line. I simply said, "I heard enough to understand that some of the considerations around my estate and my future had already been discussed at length, without me." The silence that followed was the loudest I've ever sat in. Martin started to speak, and I raised one hand gently. "I'm not here to argue. I'm not angry. I'm telling you this because I believe you deserve to know that I know, and because I want everything between us from this point forward to be built on something real." Renata looked up. Her eyes were full of something complicated. Shame, I think, and grief, maybe relief. "I'm still your father," and I told her. "Nothing changes that." But she heard the other part too, the part I didn't say out loud, that some things had already changed, that they had changed the evening she said okay. We didn't have dessert that night. Martin was quiet on the way out. Not cold exactly. More like a man reassessing a situation he thought he understood. He shook my hand at the door, and his grip was different than usual. Not weak, just honest for the first time. Renata hugged me. She held on for a moment, and I heard her take a breath, the kind that sits just before words that don't come. I patted her back and let go first. In the weeks after that dinner, things shifted. Martin called less. The warmth in his voice when he did call had a different texture. Less performance, more caution. Renata and I began to find our way back to something quieter and more genuine. The Sunday morning calls resumed, slowly. They were different, a little more careful on her end, a little more patient on mine, but they were real. That meant something. She never directly addressed what she had agreed to in that kitchen. She didn't need to. I had watched her face at that restaurant table, and I had seen everything I needed to see. She knew what she had done. She knew that I knew. Sometimes that's enough. I still go to the cottage. I went last August, just for a week on my own. I sat on Gerald's dock in the mornings with coffee and watched the mist come off the water the way he always described it. Took the canoe out a few times. Read 3 books, slept deeply. One evening, I found one of his old fishing lures in the drawer of the porch table. Just a small thing, rusted, worn, clearly used many times. I held it in my palm for a while and thought about him, about what he had said in that letter, that I was the only person who had ever loved him without wanting anything in return. I thought about how rare that is, and how easy it is to lose. I put the lure back in the drawer. I'm leaving it there. I'm not going to tell you I came out of this unchanged. I didn't. There is a version of my relationship with my daughter that no longer exists, and that absence is real, even if what replaced it is truer. I'm not going to tell you Martin is entirely a villain. He's a man who is afraid of not having enough. That's not rare. That's human. It just isn't something I'm willing to arrange my life around. And I'm not going to tell you the money made any of this easier. It didn't. If anything, it put a light on the room and made visible certain shapes I might have preferred not to see clearly. What I can tell you is this: trust is a thing you build over years and lose in an instant, not because of one dramatic betrayal, but because of a small word said quietly in a kitchen when someone thought no one was listening. Okay, that word cost more than $6.8 million. And what it bought me was clarity about who I am, what I value, and how I want to spend whatever time I have left. Quietly, intentionally, with people who show up not because of what I might leave behind, but because they actually want to be there. Gerald knew how to do that. He chose people the same way he chose his cottage, not for what they were worth, but for how they made him feel when everything was quiet. I'm learning to do the same. If this story stayed with you in any way, I'd be glad if you'd leave a like. It helps more people find it. And if you have thoughts about what you would have done, about whether I was right, about whether you've ever stood in a moment like that one, Share them in the comments. I read everything. Thank you for being here. Take care of the people who deserve it.